You already know the feeling. You don't need anyone to describe it to you because it lives inside your body like a scar that hasn't finished forming. It's the feeling of lying awake at 3 in the morning, replaying a conversation that somehow ended with you apologizing for being hurt. It's the slow, suffocating realization that you have spent weeks, months, maybe years shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's comfort zone, editing your voice, monitoring your expressions, censoring your own emotions before they even reach the surface, all to keep the peace in a relationship that was never really peaceful. It's the exhaustion that goes deeper than sleep can fix. The kind of tired that lives behind your eyes and in the hollow space between your ribs. You felt it every time you tried to explain how their words wounded you and watched their face shift, not into remorse, not into guilt, but into something cold and calculating, like a chess player rearranging the board. You know this feeling because you lived it. And the fact that you're here reading this tells me something important about you. It tells me that some part of you has finally decided that feeling this way is not something you deserve. And you are absolutely right. But here's where this gets complicated, and where most people make the mistake that costs them years of their life. The question most people ask when they've been broken down by someone psychologically manipulative is this: how do I make them feel what I felt? How do I make them hurt the way they hurt me? That question is completely human, completely understandable, and almost completely useless. Not because you don't deserve for them to understand the pain they caused, but because you are working from an assumption that simply does not match reality. You are assuming that a narcissist experiences pain, guilt, remorse, and empathy the way you do. And that assumption is the very thing that kept you trapped. Let's talk about what a narcissist actually is at the psychological level. Because without this understanding, everything else you try will fail. Narcissistic personality disorder is not simply arrogance. It is not confidence gone too far. It is a profound structural wound in the self, a deep and largely unconscious architecture built to protect a core that the narcissists themselves cannot face. At the center of every clinical narcissist is not pride. At the center is shame. Not the passing shame a healthy person feels when they've done something wrong and corrects it. This is a different kind entirely. It is the kind of shame that feels existential, the kind that whispers they are fundamentally broken, worthless, and unworthy of love. That core wound, which usually forms in early childhood, is too devastating to consciously live with. So the psyche builds a fortress around it. The fortress is the false self, a grandiose, inflated, invulnerable persona that exists specifically to deny the wound beneath it. Everything a narcissist does, every manipulation, every lie, every devaluation, every gaslighting episode, every moment they made you doubt your own sanity, every time they rewrote history and convinced you that your memory was wrong, all of it flows from this single imperative: protect the false self at all costs. And protecting the false self requires one thing above all others: supply. Narcissistic supply is the emotional fuel that keeps the false self inflated. It is attention. It is admiration. It is fear. It is your tears. It is your anger. It is your confusion. It is your desperate attempts to reach them, to make them understand. Every emotional reaction you give, whether love or rage, whether begging or threatening, whether sobbing or sending the perfectly worded message you thought would finally make them get it, every single one of those reactions is supply. Every one tells them that they still matter to you, that they still have power over you, that they are still the gravitational center of your emotional universe. So when you confront them with tears and tell them how deeply they hurt you, they do not feel guilt. They feel satisfied. Not consciously, perhaps, but at the operational level of the psyche, your pain confirms their significance. When you send the angry message listing every single thing they did wrong, they are not reading a list of their failures. They are reading confirmation that you are still consumed by them. And here is the devastating irony nobody tells you early in recovery. The more emotionally reactive you are, the more powerful they feel, and the less actual pain they experience. This is why traditional revenge fails. This is why every dramatic confrontation, every ultimatum delivered with shaking hands and a racing heart, leaves you feeling emptier than before. Because you are fighting with weapons that do not work against the architecture you are fighting against. You are trying to cause guilt in a system that has structurally disabled guilt. You are trying to cause empathy in a psyche that has weaponized the absence of empathy as a survival strategy. You are pouring your life force into a machine that converts your energy into their power. So what actually hurts a narcissist? What actually reaches past the fortress and strikes the wound beneath? The answer is not what most people expect, and when it truly lands in your mind and settles into your bones, it will change everything. What genuinely destabilizes a narcissist, what creates in them the closest thing to actual pain that their psychological architecture allows, is not your anger. It is not your tears. It is not your public call-out or your perfectly crafted revenge. What destabilizes a narcissist is your indifference, your withdrawal, your silence, your complete and total disengagement from the game. What hurts a narcissist is the absence of you. Think about what they cannot tolerate. They cannot tolerate being ignored. They cannot tolerate being irrelevant. They cannot tolerate the realization that you have moved your emotional center away from them, that you are no longer organized around their moods, their approval, their disapproval, their silence, their attention. When you stop reacting, when you stop seeking closure, when you stop trying to make them understand, when you become genuinely and profoundly uninterested in their opinion of you, you remove the one thing their false self cannot survive without. You remove the supply. And when supply is removed, the false self begins to crack, not in a way that produces the remorse you are hoping for, but in a way that produces something that functions like pain for the narcissist. It is called narcissistic injury. And when the injury is sustained, it escalates into narcissistic collapse. Narcissistic injury is what happens when reality penetrates the fortress. When the image they've constructed of themselves as powerful, desirable, and indispensable is contradicted by an undeniable external reality. Your indifference is that contradiction. Your silence is that reality. When you stop coming back, when you stop responding to their provocations, when you stop being available for the cycles of idealization and devaluation they require to feel alive, you are not simply leaving a relationship. You are dismantling the operating system of their false self. And that dismantling, clinically speaking, feels to a narcissist like annihilation. But here is where people miss the point entirely. You are not doing this to punish them. You are not going silent because you calculated that silence would be the best revenge. Because if you do it for those reasons, you are still emotionally tethered to them. You are still organized around them. True power does not look like strategic indifference. True power looks like genuine indifference. And the path from strategic to genuine runs directly through the reconstruction of your own identity, your own value, your own inner life. Here is what the narcissist took from you that most people never fully name. They didn't just take your peace of mind or your confidence. What they systematically dismantled, layer by layer, through a process so gradual you barely felt it happening, was your relationship with your own perception of reality. Gaslighting is not just lying. Gaslighting is the deliberate restructuring of your cognitive framework, the systematic replacement of your own sense of what is real with their curated version of events. Over time, you didn't just start to doubt individual memories. You started to doubt the instrument of your own mind. You started to wonder whether you were the problem. You started to edit yourself in real time, checking every thought and feeling against their imagined reaction before you allowed yourself to experience it fully. That is damage to the very center of your sense of self, and recovering it is the only process that matters. Because here is the profound truth beneath all of this. The real answer to how to make a narcissist feel the pain they put you through is not about them at all. It never was. The power move is not revenge. The power move is your recovery, your radical, unapologetic, deliberate, and relentless return to yourself. Every day that you choose your own healing over the compulsion to monitor their life, you are taking something from them. Every day that you rebuild your sense of what is real, what you deserve, what your voice sounds like when it isn't shaped by fear, you are removing something from their reach. The no contact principle is not a tactic of emotional warfare. It is a psychological necessity for recovery. Research in trauma bonding has documented that the intermittent reinforcement cycle used by narcissists, the unpredictable alternation between warmth and cruelty, between idealization and devaluation, creates a biochemical addiction in the brain structurally similar to substance dependence. The highs of idealization flood the brain with dopamine and oxytocin. The lows of devaluation spike cortisol and trigger an anxious drive to restore the bond. This cycle, repeated over months and years, literally rewires the neural architecture of the person on the receiving end. This is why you couldn't just leave. This is why you went back even when you knew. This is why the logical part of your brain knew it was toxic and the rest of you didn't care. It wasn't weakness. It was biology responding to a carefully conditioned pattern. The gray rock method, the psychological strategy of becoming as emotionally unresponsive as a gray rock when interaction is unavoidable, works because it starves the mechanism. The narcissist needs an emotional reaction the way a fire needs oxygen. Give them nothing to react to. No drama, no anger, no visible pain, no visible triumph. Flat, calm, disengaged. You become a surface with nothing to grip. And without emotional grip, the narcissist has no way to regulate their own internal world through you, which is precisely what they've been doing all along. They were not in a relationship with you. They were using the relationship as an external regulatory mechanism for a self that cannot regulate from within. A narcissist does not actually see you. They never did. They saw a reflection of themselves. They saw a source of supply. They saw a function. The person they idealized in the beginning was not you. It was a projection of their own fantasy of the perfect mirror. When you began to show complexity, needs, disagreements, when you began to be a fully realized human being with your own reality, you became a threat to the projection. And so the devaluation began. You were not devalued because you were lacking. You were devalued because you were real. Your humanity itself was the threat. Knowing this, truly absorbing this at a cellular level, is the beginning of your liberation, because it means that none of it was ever about your worth. None of it was a verdict on your value as a person. Every criticism they lodged, every flaw they highlighted, every moment they made you feel small or crazy or too much or not enough, was a projection of the fragments of themselves they could not tolerate seeing. You became the canvas for their disowned shame. And the moment you understand that, deeply, not just intellectually, but in your body and in your gut, the moment you stop trying to appeal the verdict that was never actually about you, you step outside the courtroom entirely. Your recovery is the revenge, not in a petty or performative sense, but in the most profound sense possible. A narcissist needs you to be diminished. They need you to be confused. They need you to be chasing them, explaining yourself, seeking their validation. Their entire relational strategy depends on the other person remaining psychologically subordinate, emotionally reactive, and perpetually off balance. The single most devastating thing you can do, the one thing they are structurally incapable of handling, is to become whole, to become settled, to become someone who no longer needs their validation because you have rebuilt your own inner authority, to become someone who does not monitor their social media, does not wonder who they're with now, does not lie awake hoping they regret it. The greatest pain a narcissist can experience is the permanent, irrevocable loss of access to you. Not your anger, not your grief performing itself for their consumption, but the access itself. And the greatest gift you can give yourself is to make that loss permanent, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as a declaration that you belong to yourself now, that your energy, your attention, your time, your emotional world, your future, your joy, all of it, is yours, and it is not for sale. Not for any price they might offer, not for any love bombing, not for any temporary return to the warmth of the idealization phase that your nervous system still aches for at 3 in the morning when the guard is down. You know now what that warmth cost you. You know now what it was made of. And knowledge, the real kind, the kind that lives in the body and not just in the brain, cannot be unknowed. Every boundary you set, not as a performance for anyone else to witness, but as a genuine act of self-respect, is a statement about what you are worth. Every time you choose your peace over someone else's chaos, you are enacting the truth that you matter. Every time you sit in the discomfort of someone else's displeasure and do not collapse under it, you are proving to your own nervous system that you can survive disapproval, that your worth does not depend on their validation, that you do not need the approval of someone who was incapable of seeing you clearly. You are not the confused, diminished, exhausted version of yourself that they constructed through years of deliberate psychological conditioning. You are the person who survived that, who looked at the architecture of that damage clearly, who chose to understand it rather than simply endure it. That is not a small thing. That is everything. That is the only revenge that matters. That is the only justice that will ever feel real. Not because it punishes them, but because it liberates you. And your liberation is something they will never be able to take back. If this spoke to something real inside you, if it named something you've been carrying that you couldn't quite put into words, then stay close, because this is only the beginning of what we're building here. Subscribe to this channel right now, because what comes next goes even deeper into how you recover your sense of self, how you rebuild trust in your own perception, how you establish boundaries that don't collapse under pressure, how you recognize these patterns before they take root in the next relationship, and how you transform everything that was done to you into the foundation of a life that no one will ever diminish again. This conversation is not finished. It has barely begun, and the part of you that needed to hear this today is going to need what comes next even more.